electrical synapse, there is no synaptic cleft. Because there is no synaptic cleft, what will happen? The presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane are very close to each other. Brain is the center for collecting all the information and sending those information back to the target organ. What is there inside the synaptic vesicle? Neurotransmitters are there. What are those neurotransmitters? They are nothing but chemicals. Why is it grey in color? It is grey in color because most of the neurons are concentrated there. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to another session on chapter 21, that is Neural Control and Coordination. I am Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about the mechanism of the action of the muscle, right? Wherein how the contraction and the relaxation of the muscle, occurs by maintaining a concentration gradient. We had studied about it. In today's session, let us discuss about after the chemical signal reaches the axon, that is the tip of the axon, which is called as the synaptic knob. So, from one synaptic knob to another neuron, how the information is transmitted or how the impulses are transmitted, we shall look into. So, we shall see about the transmission of impulses, and we shall also look into a very interesting topic, which is the parts of the human brain. So, to begin with today's session, let us study about the transmission of impulses. So, a nerve impulse. So, throughout this chapter, this word had kept repeating, right? Impulses. So, what is impulses? It is nothing but the messages that is sent from one neuron to the other until it reaches the target organ, so that that particular organ will know what to do, how to react. So, a nerve impulse is transmitted from one neuron to another neuron through junctions called as synapses. So, you know what a synaptic knob is, right? So, if you don't know, please visit the previous sessions of this chapter wherein we had studied the structure of the neuron. So, the axon extends and it forms into branches, that is the terminal part of the axon branches, and that branch ends in synaptic small bulb-like structures called as the synaptic knob. Can you see this? This is the synaptic knob. So, in between two synaptic knobs, there is a junction that is present, which is called as the synapses. So, from that junction, actually through that junction, the signals are passed from one neuron to another neuron. And a synapse, so what is a synapse exactly? A synapse is formed by the membranes of a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron. So, presynaptic neuron is what? The one which has already received the message or one that has already received the impulse. Postsynaptic is the one that is going to receive the impulse or the message. So, the message transmits from the presynaptic neuron to the next neuron, which is the postsynaptic neuron. So, a synapse is formed by a membrane of the presynaptic neuron and that of the postsynaptic neuron. So, this particular junction, it is called as the synapse. And this synapse, it may or may not be separated by a gap, which is called a synaptic cleft. So, it depends in between some of the neurons or between some of the synaptic knobs, there is a cleft or a gap that is present, which is called as the synaptic cleft. Not necessarily that it has to be present, because some of the neurons will not have a cleft between the synapses. And there are two types of synapses. One is the electrical synapses and the second one is the chemical synapses. So, it is from, so if you can see, I have put a diagram of a neuron. So, what are the parts of the neuron? The neuron is mainly made up of the cell body, then it has the dendrites, and from that, from the cell body extends a long tubular structure which is called as the axon, and that axon terminates to form branches, and the tip of the branches there is presence of the synaptic knob. This one synaptic knob they have taken and shown the diagram here. So, here this is the axon terminal and this is the synaptic knob that is there. Inside the synaptic knob there is presence of small vesicles which are called as synaptic vesicles, and this is one neuron. This is the I'll just write it here. It is the presynaptic knob and this is the postsynaptic knob. So, between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, there is a gap that is shown here, which is called as the synaptic cleft. Not all neurons will possess a gap. Some neurons might possess, some neurons may not possess that gaps. And not just that, they have certain ligated receptors to receive the signal. So, whatever signals, if you can see here in the form of chemicals or neurotransmitters, the signals will be sent which will be received by these ligated channels, which are the receptors for the neurotransmitters, or ligated channels which are the receivers of chemicals such as the neurotransmitters. So, that is how the neurotransmitters from the synaptic vessels will get released and they will be received by the ligate, that is ligand gated channels, and then they will move from one neuron to another. Now, they will reach that neuron. In that neuron, same thing will take place. What we had studied in the previous session, and next they will reach the axon terminal. Again, in that other neuron also the same process will occur. It will keep on repeating. The cycle repeats continuously. So, this is about the synaptic knobs. Now, talking about, I told you, in the synapses. So, what is synapsis? It is the junction between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, and it is called as the synapses, right? And the synapses are of two types, electrical synapses and chemical synapses. So, first talking about the electrical synapses. So, an electrical synapse, in an electrical synapse, the membranes of the pre and the postsynaptic neuron. So, the membrane of the presynaptic neuron and the membrane of the postsynaptic neuron are very close to each other. That is, they are in close proximity, or they are very close to each other. And electrical current will flow directly from one neuron to the other across the synapses. Now, it is understood. What is there between two synaptic neurons? There is a synaptic cleft or a synapse. Some of the synapse will have a synaptic cleft, some may not. That is not the question here. So, what is it in electrical synapses? So, in electrical synapses, between the membranes of the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron, there is a small, that is, they are closer to each other. They are not arranged far to each other. They are very close to each other, and the electrical current, therefore, it flows directly from the presynaptic neuron to the postsynaptic neuron. So, that is about electrical synapses. And the transmission of an impulse across the electrical synapse is very similar to the impulse conduction along a single axon. So, how in a single axon the impulse conduction occurs, just like that here also the impulse conduction occurs, and the impulse transmission across an electrical synapse is always faster when compared to that of a chemical synapse. Why is it faster? Because here the proximity of the postsynaptic membrane and the presynaptic membrane is very near. They are very close to each other. That is why the conduction of electrical synapses, the transmission of impulses in an electrical synapse is more faster than compared to that of the chemical synapse. But electrical synapses are rare in our system. In our human system, electrical synapses are very rare. Why? Because the transmission of impulses in a human being is through chemicals, right? Through neurotransmitters. So, that is why these electrical synapses are very, very rare in our system. So, here I have shown a diagram of the electrical synapse. So, this is the synaptic knob, synaptic, or I'll write it as synapse. This is the presynapse neuron and this is the postsynapse neuron. So, between the pre and the post, between these two membranes, you can see there is close proximity that is present, and therefore, the electrical impulses can easily travel directly. So, that is why the transmission of electrical impulses is quite very fast in this particular case. Next, moving on to the next synapse, which is the chemical synapses. So, in a chemical synapse, the membrane of the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic neuron are separated by a fluid-filled space which is called a synaptic cleft. So, now it is understood. In electrical synapse, there is no synaptic cleft. Because there is no synaptic cleft, what will happen? The presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane are very close to each other. Therefore, it is the direct flow of electrical impulses will occur, and therefore the transmission of electrical impulse is faster when compared to that of chemical impulse. But in the case of chemical synapses, between the presynaptic neuron, membrane of the presynaptic neuron and the membrane of the postsynaptic neuron, there is a gap, fluid filled gap, which is called as the synaptic cleft. If you can see here, there is presence of the synaptic cleft here. So here this one, the small gap that is there, it is called as the synaptic cleft. So between these two, that is the presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane, there is a fluid filled gap here. Synaptic cleft, what is there in this? It is filled with fluid, a fluid matrix. So therefore, because of the presence of a gap, so chemicals, and here there is a presence of a fluid filled space here, and what happens here? Here we have the synaptic vesicles. What is there inside the synaptic vesicles? Neurotransmitters are there. What are those neurotransmitters? They are nothing but chemicals. So the small yellow color round things that you can see, no, that is nothing but the neurotransmitters. And when I say neurotransmitters, they are nothing but chemicals. It is not like how in a mobile tower through radioactive waves or something the messages are sent. It is not like that in the human body. In the human body, the transfer of impulses or messages is always in the form of neurotransmitters. What are these neurotransmitters? They are nothing but made up of chemicals. So they come out of, so when they get excited, they come out of this particular synaptic vesicles and they travel from one synaptic knob into the other. That is how they travel from one neuron to another neuron. Until when? Until the target site is reached. So chemicals here called neurotransmitters are involved in the transmission of impulses across the synaptic cleft. And the axon terminal, it contains some vesicles which are filled with these neurotransmitters. So that is what I explained here. So this is how the impulses are sent in the case of chemical synapses. And here we'll study in detail about the chemical synapses. Electrical synapses we didn't study in detail. I just made you understand what is an electrical synapse. It is not needed because in human body we don't find electrical synapse and it is very rare. So that is why. Most in human body we find chemical synapses. So we shall study about this in detail. So when an impulse or an action potential is created, what do we mean by action potential? It is nothing but an impulse should be created. Say for example, somebody pinches you. You will feel that pain, right? Why? So much process that I explained will be taking place. So that is why you will feel that pain. So that pain is an impulse that is being created. So here when an impulse or action potential, it comes near the axon terminal. So when it reaches the axon terminal, it stimulates the movement of synaptic vesicles towards the membrane. So if you can see here, somebody has pinched you, right? You'll feel that pain. How are you feeling that pain? If you could not feel that pain, you would not even know what is a pinch, right? So here what happens, or what is a beating? Nothing you would know. So here what happens here is, there is a neuron. From that neuron, from the cell body, the impulses will be it will travel towards the axon, and in the axon, how the impulses are generated, that we had seen in the previous session. Go back to the previous session and have a look at it. Okay, from that, now the impulse has reached the axon terminal, or the terminal of the axon, which is branched. Now it will reach the branching of the axons, and there at the branching, what is the synaptic knob is there? It will reach the synaptic knob. What is there in the synaptic knob? In the synaptic knob, synaptic vesicles are there. Those synaptic vesicles will rupture and it will release the neurotransmitters or the chemicals. Now these neurotransmitters, they actually stimulate, or these impulses that are there, they actually stimulate the vesicles to move towards the membrane. Towards which membrane? They have to move towards the presynaptic membrane, so that from there the neurotransmitters which are present inside the synaptic vesicle can get released and enter into the postsynaptic membrane. They move towards the membrane where they fuse with the plasma membrane and they will release the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. That is what has happened here. Can you see here in the entire synaptic cleft, if you can see, the neurotransmitters are released. Now these neurotransmitters should enter into the postsynaptic neuron. Then the released neurotransmitter, what they will do? They will bind to specific receptors. Where are the receptors present? The receptors are present in the next neuron, right? In the membrane of the next neuron. So these are the receptors. Receptors are the ones which receives the signals. Now the receptors are receiving the signals from the presynaptic neuron in the form of chemicals, and they will receive the signals. That is, the postsynaptic membrane will receive the signals. Now it has entered into the postsynaptic membrane. From the postsynaptic membrane, it will enter into the cell body, from the cell body into the axon, and from the axon to the axon terminal, and then again to the synaptic knob. Again it will continue, because our body is made up of millions togethers of neurons. Say for example, from the skin, the information has to reach our brain, right? And from the brain, it has to reach back to the skin to make us feel the pain, right? So this is the process that actually occurs from one neuron to another until the signal reaches the brain, and from brain back to the skin. So that is what actually happens here. Next, what happens when it goes and binds? What did I tell you? That the synaptic vesicles, if you can see here, the released neurotransmitters bind to the specific receptors. They will go and bind to the specific receptors. Where are the specific receptors present? They are present in the postsynaptic neuron membrane. Now, once the chemicals or the neurotransmitters goes and bind to the receptors which are present on the postsynaptic membrane, it will open the ion channels. The ion channels that are there, these ion channels will get opened. When the ion channels get opened, it will allow the entry of the ions, and these ions will generate a new potential in the postsynaptic neuron. Now a new potential, action potential, is created in the postsynaptic neuron. That action potential, by the concentration, maintenance of the concentration gradient, that is the sodium concentration, potassium concentration, all that we had studied in the previous session, right? All that will occur, and then again they will reach the axon terminal, again they will reach the synaptic knob, again this process will occur, again the action potential will be generated. That is how it will lead to the excitatory or inhibitory activity of the new potential. Either the neurons can get, or the axon can get excited, or it can remain in the relaxation state. So that is how this particular chemical synapses travels from one neuron to another neuron. Next, moving further, we shall study about, now we understood how they travel from one neuron to another neuron. Until where? Until they reaches the brain, because brain is the center for collecting all the information and sending those information back to the target organ, right? So that is why we shall study about the human brain. That is, human brain comes under the central nervous system, right? So the human brain is well protected by the skull. So the hard part that is there, which you can feel, that is the skull. So it is well protected by the skull. So the entire human brain is covered by the skull. And the different parts of the skull and all that we have studied in the previous chapter. So you can go back to the previous videos and have a look into it. And what is there inside the skull? Different parts are there, and what are their function we shall look into. So inside the skull, the brain is covered by a cranial meninges, and this cranial meninges is actually made up of an outer layer which is called as dura mater, and inner to that it is made up of a very thin middle layer called as arachnoid, and inner to the middle layer is present an inner layer which is called as the pia mater, and this inner layer is the one which is in direct contact with the brain tissue. So the skull is there. inside the skull, the outer layer is there, which is called as the cranial meninges, and it is the cranial meninges, and inside to the cranial meninges, there is a middle layer which is called as, which is very, very thin, and it is called as the dura mater, and inner to the dura mater, it is the inner membrane which is called as the pia mater, and the pia mater is in direct contact with the brain tissue. So if you can see here, it has different layers. So they have not shown this, but they have just shown the cerebrum part of the brain, that is from the inner tissues. They have shown the diagram here, but that is not mentioned. That is a different covering of the brain is not mentioned. So we need to understand the brain is covered by apart from the skull, the brain is also covered inside the skull. The brain is covered by three important layers: the outer layer, which is called as the dura mater, the middle layer called as the arachnoid, and the inner layer which is called as the pia mater. And this pia mater it comes in contact with all the tissues of the brains. Next, talking about the major parts of the brain. So inner to the pia mater, the parts of the brain are present. What are the major parts we shall look into? So the brain is divided into forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. This is the forebrain. We have the midbrain, and the back of a skull, this is the hindbrain. So that is how they have divided the parts for easy studying. Let's talk about in the forebrain what all are there, in the midbrain what is there, and in the hindbrain what is there. So first talking about the forebrain. So the forebrain is made up of cerebrum, it is made up of thalamus, and it is made up of hypothalamus. So if you can see, it consists of all these folded structure which is called as the cerebrum, then we have the thalamus and the hypothalamus. So these three parts, where is it present? It is present in the forebrain. That is the front part here, forebrain, it is present. So the cerebrum is the one that forms the major part of the human brain. Among all the parts of the human brain, the cerebrum, it forms the major part. Because as you can see, majority of the region is covered by the cerebrum. Not just the forebrain region, but the midbrain, the hindbrain, all that region is also covered by the cerebrum. So it forms the major part of the brain. So in a deep cleft divides the cerebrum longitudinally into two halves, which is termed as the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. So if you can see here, you can see the cerebrum is divided by clefts into the cerebral hemisphere. Again here in the cerebral hemisphere, it is divided as the right cerebrum and the left cerebrum. The hemispheres are connected by a tract of nerve fibers, and they are called as corpus callosum. So what is corpus callosum? Corpus callosums are the nerve fibers that connects the cerebrum. That is the left cerebrum and the right cerebrum. So this is about the forebrain. So in the forebrain, we came to know about the cerebrum. Where is it located? What are the different parts in the cerebrum and all that. Next, moving further, the layer of the cells which covers the cerebral hemisphere is called the cerebral cortex, and it is thrown into prominent folds. Can you see here? The cerebrum is made up of cerebral cortex, and they are in the form of folds. And the cerebral cortex is referred to as the grey matter due to its greyish appearance. So we have the grey matter and the white matter in the brain, right? So this cerebral cortex is actually grey in color, and therefore it is called as the grey matter. So moving further, the neuron cell bodies are concentrated in the grey matter, giving it the color. So why is it grey in color? What did I tell you? The cerebrum is the one that for the entire forebrain, wherever the cerebrum is present, it is grey in color, and therefore it is called as the grey matter. Why is it grey in color? It is grey in color because most of the neurons are concentrated there. I told you they are connected by neurons. The left and the right cerebrum are connected to each other by the neurons, and because most of the neurons are concentrated there, it is grey in color. And the cerebral cortex contains motor areas, which receives the signals, sensory areas, and large regions that are neither clearly sensory or motory in function. And these regions are called as the association areas because they are very, very important in the complex functions like intersensory association, memory, communication, all that. So our memory, how we communicate, the way we talk, everything, the new languages that we learn, everything is because of the gray matter that is present in the gray matter. Has not much of the function in transmission of messages or all that, but or impulses or all that, but its main function, it has some important functions such as it helps to maintain a memory, a good communication skills and all that. So this is about the cerebrum. So the fibers and the tracts are covered by myelin sheath. I told you there are nerve fibers which joins the right cerebrum with that of the left cerebral hemisphere, right? And these fibers, nerve fibers, are covered by myelin sheath. If you remember, what are the nerve fibers made up of? They are nothing but neurons or nerve cells, right? And in those nerve cells, the axons are myelinated axons are there, non-myelinated axons are there. In this case, it is a myelinated axon because the nerve fibers are covered by myelin sheath. And these nerve fibers, they constitute the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere. And this is why they give an opaque white appearance to the layer. So, the inner part of the cerebral hemisphere is present the white matter. Why? Because there it consists of some of the nerve fibers which are covered by myelin sheath, and that actually gives it a opaque or white color to that particular part, and hence it is called as the white matter. And the cerebrum wraps around the structure called as the thalamus, and this thalamus is a major coordinating center for sensory and motor signaling. So, the cerebral hemispheres do not participate in any of the sensory or motor signaling. And I told you, their main function is memory and communication, only that, right? But, or in the forebrain, below the cerebrum, there is presence of the thalamus and the hypothalamus, right? Especially the thalamus region of the brain is the one that actually coordinates with the other sensory organs and coordinates with the motor signaling and all that. So that is the function of the thalamus here. Next, talking about, there is one more very important part of the brain which is called as the hypothalamus. And where is it present? It is present just below the thalamus. So if you can see, just below the thalamus region, the hypothalamus region is present. The hypothalamus, it contains a number of centers, and these centers, it controls the body temperature, it controls the urge for eating and drinking. So, the body temperature is maintained by the hypothalamus, and our urge for food, that is, we feel hungry, and that message should be sent, right, that we are hunger. All that is done by the hypothalamus. We feel thirsty. So, all that messages are controlled by the hypothalamus. And hypothalamus also contains several groups of neurosecretory cells, and these cells, they secrete the hormones called as hypothalamic hormones. And hypothalamic hormones are the hormones that regulate most of our body functions. So that is why hypothalamus is one of the major part of the brain. And where is it present? It is present just below the thalamus of the brain. Next, moving further, we shall study about the inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere. So we understood that the cerebral hemisphere is called as the gray matter. Inner to the cerebral hemisphere is presence of the white matter. Now, what are the inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere? We shall look into. So, the inner parts of the cerebral hemisphere and a group of associated structures like amygdala, the hippocampus, etc. They form a complex structure called as the limbic lobe or the limbic system. So here, inner to the hypothalamus, there are presence of a group of associated structures which are called as amygdala, hippocampus, etc. And these form a complex structure called as the limbic lobe or the limbic system. And along with the hypothalamus, that is the limbic system, is involved in the regulation of sexual behavior, the expression of emotional reactions. Say for example, if you feel any excitement, pleasure, sadness, anything, you're too happy, all that is regulated by the hypothalamus, along with it functioning along with the limbic system of the brain. And also motivation. Sometimes you're watching a movie of an athlete, you get motivated, I need to do something. So why that motivation? All that is because of the working of the hypothalamus along with the limbic system. So this is the function of the hypothalamus and the limbic system of the brain. Next, moving further, so we shall study about the midbrain. So the midbrain is located between the thalamus or the hypothalamus of the forebrain and the pons of the hindbrain. So if you can see here, there is presence of the thalamus and the hypothalamus. Then we have the pons. So in between the thalamus and the hypothalamus and the pons is present the midbrain. Somewhere in between here we have the midbrain that is present. So what is there in the midbrain? We shall look into. So in the midbrain, there is a canal called as the cerebral aqueduct which passes through the midbrain. So there is a small canal that is there which is called as the cerebral aqueduct, and that canal passes through the midbrain. And the dorsal portion or the upper portion of the midbrain, it consists of 4 round swellings or lobes which is called as the corpora quadrigemina. So this upper part or the dorsal part of the midbrain, it consists of 4 swellings, 4 swelling like structures, and those swellings are nothing but lobe like structures, and they are called as the corpora quadrigemina. Next, moving further, talking about the hindbrain. So that was about the midbrain. Talking about the hindbrain, what is there in the hindbrain? It mainly consists of pons, cerebellum and medulla, which is also called as medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is one of the important parts of the brain. It consists of pons, cerebellum and consists of the medulla oblongata. Both of these forms the part of the hindbrain. Pons consists of some fiber tracts that connect different regions of the brain. And the cerebellum, what is the cerebellum? It is present in the forebrain, right? So the cerebellum has very convoluted surface, and this surface provides the additional space for many more neurons. So that is why, because of the presence of a lot of neurons in the cerebellum, it is grey in color. We had studied that in the previous slide. And the medulla of the brain is connected to the spinal cord. So if you can see the medulla oblongata of the brain, it is connected to the spinal cord. So this one, spinal cord. Medulla contains certain centers which control respiration, cardiovascular reflexes and gastric secretions. And 3 major regions make up the brain stem, which is called as the midbrain, that is pons and medulla oblongata. And brain stem forms the connection between the brain and the spinal cord. They are called as a stem. How a stem connects the upper part of the body to that of the root of a plant, right? Just like that here also, the hindbrain, which consists of the pons, cerebellum and medulla, they form the stem for the upper parts of the brain to the forebrain and the midbrain to that of the spinal cord. So that is why they are called as the stem of the brain. So which is the stem of the brain? It is the hindbrain, consisting of the pons cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. They form the stem of the brain, which connects the forebrain and the midbrain with that of the spinal cord. So this is about the structure of the brain. And medulla oblongata is very, very important for the processes such as respiration, cardiovascular reflexes, gastric secretions and all that. So this was about this particular session wherein we studied how exactly the nerve impulses are transmitted from one neuron to another neuron, and we also studied the different parts of the brain. In the coming session, we shall study about action reflexes. So action reflexes, when somebody tries to hit you, you just try to move back, you avoid, right? So that is the action reflex that you're showing. So what exactly is this action reflex? How does it work? We shall look into in the coming session. So we shall meet again in the coming session. Thank you.